Hi, this is Marina Johnson, and today I will be talking about book banning and challenging. When I was organizing my project, I noticed that there were four main topics in connection to book banning. There was the politics, there was the education system, there was diversity or representation, which I'll go more into in a minute, and the law. And I have a difference between the politics and law, and we'll get more into that. So starting off strong with politics. Politics has two main points: the campaigning efforts and the control it allows. In campaigning efforts, we noticed that political parties are using book bannings to win votes. This can be seen more on a local level versus national, which means that these candidates are using what they know about their community over on a national level. So in some ways, that is good for the people who are against book banning. They see it's not on a wide scale. In addition, though, the problem with that is the fact that political parties are gaining favor in communities by taking steps to remove literature that could be considered questionable, unacceptable. So if they realize that a book is not supportive to a section of a community, they are more likely to attempt to get it removed or restricted or banned because they know they're going to be voting for them. So in this explanation, political parties are really gaining because of book banning, so therefore they may support the use of book banning more. On the opposing side, one negative impact is that book banning has become a political act to gain favor, which we kind of touched on. But whereas on the political side, for the candidates, it is supporting them getting into a position of power. On the negative side of the campaigning effort, some people are voting for those who have banned books because they like the fact that they're removing literature that they don't agree with, not necessarily because they like the candidate as a whole. So that is another issue. Moving straight on to control. So I kind of flipped this one a little differently. So I'm going to start off with the more positive is book banning. We always think of book banning control as a very negative thing, but there can be some positives to it. So book banning is creating adverse effects in the search for control. Book banning, people have actually started going out of their way to find banned books, which is beginning to allow banned books to have a higher chance of being assumed. It's actually being shown that 11% of books that are banned have 11% higher chance of being purchased, and books that are being borrowed from, such as libraries, have a 13% chance of being purchased. So people are pushing back against the control that they see by book banning and actually purchasing more. So as a whole, they're not really seeing a decline in the reading of these books, but they're seeing that people feel like they have a chance to rebel or push back, which is making them feel like they have some control. On the negative side of book banning and control, this is the side that a lot of people often go to as their argument, is book banning at its core is a form of restriction. It's a form of control because ultimately those who control what the people think controls what they believe in and what they're going to support. This can be dated back to historical times, World War II, McCarthyism. Essentially, if you can remove a book that is controversial or contradicts what the person in power is trying to explain and get their constituents to believe, then they have a much higher chance. So ultimately, book banning is a form of way to control the people on a political level. We're going to move right into the education system. The education system, there's four things that I really thought that should be spoken about. One was access. 2, student academic success. 3, having a well-rounded education. 4, student development. So access. So book banning has begun to pick up speed in the secondary sector. As I was reading articles, it has really picked up in the last 15 years, 2005, 2008, it has massively picked up. So, but specifically secondary books. Part of this is the fact that they believe that students are closer to students in the 6th to 12th are closest to adulthood, and those are the students who they have the highest chance of changing their viewpoint. They're the most malleable. So if they can change those viewpoints, and they have the ability to shape policy in a variety of institutions. So as kids are growing up, if they can control what they're thinking through the lack of access in the education system, because so many individuals go through the public education system. There's obviously things like homeschooling, private school, but all many forms of those still have connections to the general education system. So if they can shape what K through 12 students are reading, then they have a higher chance of shaping what they're thinking, and restricting what they're thinking allows for a possible power shift. On the negative side, why people are against book banning is because book banning is in the education system is being fought because it's barring students access from literature, whereas people who would support book banning are in support of it because they are getting to choose what adolescents read, which is putting favor back in their pocket. The people who are actually being controlled don't like it because it's keeping them from fighting books that represent themselves. It's making access to literature, inclusive literature, harder to find. Schools are fighting back against this because they realize the fact that it needs to be well-rounded, such as doing book banning week celebrations and book banning initiatives. And then, in addition, because they're removing or restricting of literature, certain issues are coming to light, such as school districts beginning to determine which books should be banned versus kept. There's also inequalities in student populations, are coming to light, which is inadvertently supporting the need to keep those questionable resources. Student academic success. Starting off with why people might support it. So, book banning does not show much support in relation to student success. One point is that student book banning and restriction of those resources may be banned, won't be purchased. Money spent on those resources that have community and state supports have a higher chance of being used for a far greater length of time. Therefore, they're more likely to spend that money on it. Whereas books that they don't know if the community is actually going to support, they have a higher chance of not spending money on. So, one reason why people would support book banning when it comparative to student academic success is because they know that the money they put into those resources are going to be used versus money they put into resources that could possibly be questioned or not used, may just end up in the garbage, may not be very useful to student academic success. On the flip side, there's a lot of detriment to students not being able to analyze the different literature. Students need to see diverse literature to be able to heighten cognitive function, be able to synthesize works, understand complex themes. Students who stay with texts that are familiar with them are not receiving those opportunities. So, as a whole, one reason why people are very against book banning when it comes to student academic success is that students who do not see that diverse literature are shown to have a lower ability to interpret that information, and just synthesize it as a whole. Well-rounded education. Book bannings have created changes in education for the better, or so some people believe. In many ways, districts are taking those books that are being questioned and they're looking deeper at their literature and how they're being put in the wider scope of the curriculum, which is making resources be updated. Next, teachers are beginning to look at their libraries and their resources and ask themselves, is this really the best book for what I want to teach? Does it have some ideas that are approaching stereotypes? Am I not elaborating on or using resources that could be more inclusive? So, book banning, one positive of it is the fact that it's allowing school districts as a whole and then teachers in their specific classrooms questioning if the resources they're using are really the best resources to make a well-rounded education. On the flip side, book banning is restricting students' access to a variety of texts. This is causing them to not have as much of a well-rounded education. Best practices says that students should have a wide array of text, analyze themes, grapple diverse topics, form their own opinions. Next, teachers are constantly having a ever-growing depth of state standards. Many of the texts that teachers may have used in the past that they know are reliable may be on the challenge or ban list now, and it's causing teachers to have to go one step further with an already long list of responsibilities, which can be very challenging. So they may not be able to put as much time and energy into finding new resources because they're dealing with other things. Therefore, students are not getting as well-rounded education, because while teachers are being told they can't use certain resources, they're not being given new resources to make up for those. Therefore, it's causing negative ramifications for students receiving a well-rounded education. Student development. Some reasons why people would be supportive of book banning in association with student development is that adolescents need opportunities to voice their opinions. And if you've ever talked to a middle school or a secondary student at all, they are ready to fight. They are ready to tell you their opinions. And many students are ready to fight for their right to read, meaning they're basically more highly involved in their education. Book banning is equipping students with the confidence that their voice and their opinions matter. They're becoming more, getting deeper into their reading. They're discerning if the book is really for them. So it's really pushing their development because they are in the thick of it. But kind of on the flip side, still in support of book banning, just as a little sidebar, is the fact that students who get into too mature content too quickly shows that they could be harmed emotionally. So therefore, book banning or age restricting that book can be helpful to the development of students. Some reasons why people would be against book banning in association with student development. There's a negative development for students is the fact that students who mature in those environments often self-censor, meaning that they're not going to try to interact with books that they normally would interact with or are just unfamiliar to them. And oftentimes when students or people in general do not know how to interact with material, they don't know how to dive deeper in it, and they aren't able to make those connections emotionally, intellectually, socially. So therefore, a student's sense of self is just stunted. Next, students must see themselves in literature. It needs to be a mirror, a reflection to what they see, what they read. It should be what they see in themselves. And when students cannot access that literature that reflects themselves, they're shown to exhibit negative health effects. We're moving right into my next topic, which is diversity. Representation. So, representation, there is, I think, eight quotes here? 10 quotes? Anyway, there's a lot of quotes here. And originally I had this broken up into, I think, like 3 different sections, but ultimately I realized that it could really just be talked about representation. So originally I had 3, broke it down even smaller into one, made it into one bigger topic of representation. So some reasons why people would be supportive of book banning when pertaining to representation. So as books that represent diverse characters or the LGBT community were being pushed further and further down the do not read list, many activist groups began to realize that the LGBT community needed someone to fight for them. So they began to advocate for them. This then led to other books that have people of color, just show books that could be considered controversial but reflect real people. They begin to fight for themselves. So while the banning of LGBTQ books are not necessarily a good thing, because they were pushed towards the banning side, or the restricting side, the challenging side, that made people begin to stand up and voice their opinions that no group should be quieted, which led to more groups coming out of the woodwork. On another like flip sides, book banning is beginning to remove offensive or racial stereotyping material. So certain books have material that are just perpetuating racial stereotypes, biases that need to be removed, because it's over the information in those books is overriding what diverse authors are saying, and by removing those books, we're giving voice back. So book banning can be a good thing because of the voices it's presenting. On the flip side, in the representation section, book banning disproportionately affects authors of color, their works, books that have representation as a whole. These authors have a higher chance of being seen as controversial and need to be challenged. So book banning in a lot of ways is just very negative for people of color's books, because they're trying to remove books that represent them, and if you remove books that represent people of colors and other important people in our society with diverse backgrounds, you're moving towards removing their voice. So ultimately, marginalized groups are fighting to have a fair representation in literature, and that is one more step that they have to take to fight for their right. We're moving right into the law. Once again, just like my last section with diversity, I originally had 3 or 4 sections here. Then I realized all this could be shoved together historically. So when I was doing historically, I actually found that historically there is no support for why book banning is positive. It was one of the few categories that I only found negative writing about it. So book banning can actually be dated all the way back to colonial days. And a problem with that is the fact that very few people actually know now how to fight it. Is the fact that the books that are being banned or judged are being used on the same scale that they're being used back in colonial times. So that scale is outdated, and it's causing books to be banned or restricted on an unfair scale, outdated scale. Next, previously people had repercussions if they spoke out against this book banning, and many people still are afraid that could happen. So it's keeping people silent. Lastly, going back to the fact that book banning's been around for such a long time, there's a very unclear path, and many people are very uncomfortable going down new paths. So which is keeping book banning continuing. And then lastly, they're not entirely sure. There's an argument that book banning is interceding into people's intellectual freedom or students' First Amendment rights. That's a path that hasn't been ventured down very much. Therefore, there's just a lack of knowledge on next steps on how to handle that. And like anything, new things are scary. So just as an overview, first thing, book banning is being used on a political level to gain support in campaign efforts and in an attempt to control constituents. Second, book banning has impacts on the education system through effects on students' academic success, their development, to the accessibility of the text. This accessibility is further impacting students getting a well-rounded education. 3, book banning has made impacts in representation. While books that are written by people of color or have diverse content have a high target rate, many advocates have come out to fight for the rights to be seen. And lastly, book banning has been around for a long time. Historically, advocates who have fought against it have had repercussions. This has led to a fear of what could happen in current times. In addition, there is a lack of steps on how to fight book banning. So in conclusion, there's many positive and negative to book bannings. It's very intricated into our society, many facets to it, whether political, educational, looking at diversity, or the legality of it. There are both pros and cons on both sides. As a whole through this project, I started this project off with a very negative viewpoint of book banning. I still am not in love with book banning, but I do have a better foundation, a better argument sake for each side. But as a whole, every article I saw, there was more about how it was more harmful than good. But with the evil, the harm that is brought, there is some good that has come from it, such as it is helping people reconsider the use of materials, reconsider the which books they should promote and not because of the information in it. It's brought to light overlooked groups and caused new generations to fight for the right to read. So while book banning as a whole, all the research does not support it, book banning has caused positive things to come out from it. So I hope that you have learned as much as I have about book banning. Have a great evening.